Merhabalar, yanımda DEMPSEY var, Pension Partner'ın kurucularından ve partnerlerinden. Ed, thank you so much for coming. It's a critical time and it's so critical to have your comments about what's going to happen and what's happening. Let's start with, I know you're ready to start and jump, but they're talking, the Democrats and the Republicans, actual Republicans and Obama, let's say, and lots going in the behind the closed doors, but nothing's happening yet. The equity markets is pricing it green. Are we supposed to be green and hopeful? Do you agree with that?
I think that we should, in the moment, be green and hopeful because the markets were getting rather weak. In other words, there was sell-offs going on underneath the market as the rhetoric, as all the nastiness is ratcheted up. But I think the markets are ignoring some bigger issues, some much bigger issues. Everyone seems to think that they will reach some kind of a deal simply because it's unimaginable that the U.S. could reach a technical default on the debt.
Unimaginable, you said, right? It's very important. Is there really a 0% probability that they're going to let the default?
I don't think you could say zero probability because you can never underestimate the incompetence of politicians. Never.
I like the way you put it.
You know, it's possible, sure, because these are very, especially for your viewers, that here in the U.S., these are very, very passionate, emotional issues. There is a part of the country that is deeply suspicious of the president, and then there's another part of the country, which is on the president's side, that believes that some form of basic health care is a human right that every American should have. It's a very passionate, emotional, ideological position, and you know, once people get entrenched like that, you just don't know what they could do. But from an investment point of view, you can't really bet on that because you can't bet on sort of the end of the financial system. However, the real issue is, of course, the debt limit. It's about raising the debt limit, which is a whole nother point of view. There are things going on in the market that I want to talk about below the Dow Jones, below the S&P, that people don't see, that I think everyone needs to be cautious about.
What do you mean?
Sure. So you look at the major averages, right? The Dow and the S&P, and
right,
you know, they're down maybe 3% or so, 4% off the highs. But underneath the surface, big retail stocks, big restaurant chain stocks, those stocks on a price basis are rolling over, which means their prices are going down. The market's telling you that consumer spending is going to get weaker. The U.S. market's been held up by a reflation in housing. That is passing, and we can see that many of the big banks here have laid off a lot of their mortgage staff. And you look at retailers, casual dining chains, which is where most Americans go to eat out, have been reporting lower top-line sales.
That's right.
The reason for that is very simple. The economy in the U.S. is slowing. It is slowing. Wages are not growing. And basic expenses like food, like energy, rents have been going up. So the average person has less take-home. There are real troubles in earnings, I think, coming up, which are going to likely affect the market. The political instability is, you know, again, a wild card because you don't know what kind of fuse that lights when you have political instability at the top.
So in a picture where there's uncertainty from the, well, you know, Washington, Main Street, and then the economy is slowing down, in this, you know, a little bit gloomy picture, where does one invest in? Equity markets, bonds, commodities, emerging market, U.S. markets. What should they think about? This is crazy. The VIX jumped. There's uncertainty, and they are talking, but it's not going anywhere. Federal government has been shut down. This is the 11th day, and we don't know if the October 17 debt ceiling will be raised. So what do we do? Where do we invest in?
So I'm going to give you two scenarios.
Yes.
I'm going to work on the assumption that they make some kind of a deal. And they may make a quick deal where it's just for a month or two, and then they can negotiate outside the spotlight. In other words,
kick the can down the road.
Get the spotlight off of everybody, and then they can go in the back room when it's quieted down and really come to some kind of... So assuming they make that agreement, the bullish case, the good for stock prices, is the U.S. market sort of just stays where it is. Maybe it drifts a little lower, maybe it drifts a little higher. But so if that were the case, the real place to be is in the emerging markets. The emerging markets are undergoing what we call an incompetence rotation. Money rotating away from Washington, away from the U.S. to the emerging markets, Brazil, Russia, India, China. The reason is the U.S. stock market has priced in a reflation that has not happened. The emerging markets priced in a crisis that has not happened. So they are the better investment, and they've been outperforming the U.S. strongly for the last 6 weeks. Now, if we get no big events, meaning the U.S. market doesn't take a sharp fall, just kind of is steady up or steady down, emerging markets should resync, come back up to where the U.S. and the European markets are, which is up here. If things get worse, then the argument, the place to be would actually be longer-term U.S. Treasuries. Longer term, not the short ones. The short ones are actually having a lot of volatility because of the concern, but longer-term Treasuries, because part of what's going to come out of any deal, assuming they make a deal, what's going to come out of any deal is going to be less government spending. That's likely what Obama and the Democrats are going to have to give up to get the Republicans to go along.
In a way.
Right. Less government spending. So less government spending means smaller deficits, less Treasury supply. And if you get a weak economy, those higher rated bonds or higher interest rate bonds should do well as we go into, November and December.
Which one are you leaning more towards, the bullish scenario versus the bearish? I mean, do you think they're going to come to an agreement and a deal?
I think that they'll come to some kind of deal that sort of works. I mean, that's the safe bet. You can't bet on that they can't come to a deal.
Exactly. You never know, really.
You don't know.
And also it depends on the negotiations and the other factors.
I think a lot is going to depend, one, on earnings season. In other words, if the earnings come in slightly lower but okay, no big down surprises, then I think the bullish scenario for emerging markets unfolds. I don't think the U.S. market has too much more to go, at least sitting here looking at how much it's run all year. If you get some event that we couldn't foresee because of all of the government shutdown, because of government spending being stopped for the last 13, 14 days, that sometimes produces things. It's a ripple effect. There's something that happens that we just didn't know could have happened. That would give you the more bearish case.
Definitely. You said that some of the money goes into the emerging markets, Brazil, China, India. Is Turkey one of them?
So as I recall, we don't follow the Turkish market. I think it was, you might know better than me, down quite a bit and then has come up, right?
Did it catch your attention? That's why I was looking.
I would say yes. You want to be careful of those countries that have big current account deficits, like some of the small Eastern European countries. But again, I don't follow Turkey, but I think Turkey on a fiscal basis is actually in pretty good shape.
And going back to what you said about economy, it's slowing, and IMF reduced the global outlook. In addition, of course, they are not very hopeful about the U.S. economy too, but the global outlook, not only for this year, for next year too. Are you as pessimistic, and they cut it really sharp? Are you as pessimistic as IMF? And if yes, what are your arguments?
Look, growth, the World Bank told us that, I think even 6 months prior to the IMF. Now, they work on older data, right? So they're working on older data. They're always kind of behind.
Right.
But the Fed told us that. That's the reason the Fed didn't taper. The Fed didn't taper because growth is slower than they thought, and they lowered their future projections for growth. So they're telling us everything that we are seeing. Growth is slowing. Why is it slowing? Because all of the reflation that was forced by the central banks, mainly by the Fed and then the ECB, all that reflation from the March 2009 low has now gone through the system. And there really isn't, I suppose there's always more that they can do, but as we're seeing with this budget deficit, budget deal in Washington, there's resistance by a lot of people about the Fed doing more.
True.
Right? So you have this, all the reflation has been priced in, and now you're back to the same problem. The problem is that all of that QE, all that forced money, has pushed up stock prices around the world, except for emerging markets. It has pushed up real estate prices, but has not put more people to work, and has not raised the wages of the average person around the world. That's what drives all the growth. That together with demographics, right? You have aging populations around the world. They tend to consume less. So you're going to have this long period likely, and you have a lot of debt that still still has to be worked off. It has to be paid or gone bankrupt. So it doesn't mean that you can't have good stock markets in that, which we've seen. But you have to understand that that's the environment that you're operating in.
And last question, and you raised a nice point. There is a resistance to Fed's doing more. Yet, the new Fed chairman, who is that Janet Yellen, which is a historical name because she's female, she wants to do more. And she's a Phillips curve fan, meaning she puts more emphasis and importance on what you just said, on unemployment. She says that Fed should do more for the labor market. So how do you see her? Do you think she can get more to be done in terms of the policy actions? Is she going to be different than Bernanke? Can she?
My answer to you is she's not a dictator. The Fed has a board of governors.
Right.
The board of governors has to vote along with her. She's on record as saying that if she could vote for interest rates below zero, she would do that. So you're correct in everything you said, but she is not a dictator.
She's not. She's going to take Lucker across from her, right? Or right. Against her,
right.
And many others.
Richard Fisher, right? There are a number of Fed governors that are becoming increasingly uneasy with all of this QE because they're owning so much of the U.S. debt, and they're afraid about what happens when they ultimately have to pull back on that. That, together with there is a rising tide in the U.S., and you're kind of seeing it in the right-wing part of the Republican Party, against all of this QE, monetizing debt, large deficits, etc. So the Fed, make no mistake, is a political animal at the end, and they're very attuned to political wins. And if the politicians, and there's an election coming up in a couple of years, start swinging to not wanting that, they are going to have to be, aware of it. So I don't think that anyone should think that you're going to get more accommodation out of Janet Yellen. She's considered to be more dovish than Bernanke. But I think she's going to have two issues, which is a continuing uneasiness from Fed governors to go along with it, and perhaps a rising, in other words, political tide against all of this.
True. Very well put. Thank you so much. You really did draw the picture for today, next week, what might happen and where should we invest in. Thank you coming to our studios at DEMPSEY. It was lovely to have you as always. Evet, söz tekrar sizde İstanbul'da. Burada sohbetimiz sona erdi.